Hello, everyone. My name is Raven Greenberg. I am the Social Impact Hub Research and Policy Coordinator here for the School of Social Ecology. And our goal of this new hub, which is just starting out, is to better connect the research from the school to policy and to community impacts. And so this is one of the events that we are working on with the CUSP program here today, led by Professor Richard Matthew, who is going to give some introductory remarks, and then we will be hearing from our Congressman, Dave Min. You can see that we have some exciting panels and things happening and a keynote later today as well, and Richard will give you more information on that. But please continue to follow the School of Social Ecology for additional events and things that will be coming up for our Social Impact Hub and related activities. And just want to say thank you all for being here today. You can come and tap me if you have any questions on logistics or things throughout the day as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome everybody to this event. I think it's a wonderful event. We have an incredible group of people from the university and from the community who are going to talk about wildfires and the lessons that we might be learning from what took place in January and sort of what are the things that we should be doing in Orange County and elsewhere given what we went through. And January is not just a month where there was a whole lot of issues raised because of the incredible wildfires, but there were also changes taking place at the federal level in government, which are also very relevant. So everybody is living in conditions of uncertainty about insurance and rebuilding and the level of risk we're facing and who's doing what going forward, and do we have the right team, and are we prepared in the way we should be? Are we taking advantage of the lessons of January and implementing them at the federal and state and municipal and levels and in the insurance sector? It's a great pleasure to be able to kick this off with somebody who's right at the center of all of this, who's both familiar with the university, Orange County, and with what's going on in Sacramento and inside the Beltway in DC. So let me introduce to you our representative, the representative for this area, Dave Min. He is a graduate of University of Pennsylvania, where he went to the Wharton School and then he went to Harvard Law School, started his career as an enforcement attorney, which sounds a little bit, I don't know, enforcement attorney, but working for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He was a law professor here for several years at UCI, fantastic. Decided to enter the fray of politics and became an assembly person in Sacramento from 2020 to 2024. And most recently, and this is a purple county, so the battles are always tough here. They're always hard to win. When you have somebody who's winning and winning, this is a wonderful sign of the sort of confidence that he is creating among the electorate here. But he's now a representative for the 47th district in DC, Representative Dave Min.
Is it on? Yes. Thanks. And thanks so much for the kind introduction, and thanks for having me today. It's nice to be back. My wife, Jane Stover, is still a law professor over a law school just over the way, and is, I think, going to be the chair of the Academic Senate starting later this year. So we are deeply rooted in this community. Our 3 kids have grown up in University Hills, and my oldest is going to hit high school next year, so time flies. But grateful to be here. Obviously, we are in times of uncertainty. And in the state Senate for the last 4 years, I was the chair of the Natural Resources and Water Committee. I served on the Energy and Utilities Committee. As was alluded to, I didn't start as an environmental person. I mean, you all have much deeper knowledge than me, but I started doing banking work, capital markets regulation. But when I got into elected office, climate became the most important issue to me, just because of the threat that climate change poses to our civilization, our way of life. And the way I always think about it is, if you have someone in your life that you think is going to be alive in 2050 or 2070 or beyond, we owe a moral obligation to them to take immediate and urgent action, because the science is clear. My neighbors tell me the science is clear. You all know the science is clear that we're going to blow past the 2045 goals right now. We are facing some dire situations, some dire consequences, and the economic consequences of those are also going to be severe. So we are seeing this right now in the shape of wildfires and the ever-growing wildfire threat around the world. I just got back. I went to a congressional delegation in Korea. Of course, they're dealing with unprecedented wildfires in that country right now and the aftermath of that. We just saw the LA fires. This is on top of a number of massive fires we've seen across California, a number of near misses we've seen here in Orange County, right? And so we know that every time the Santa Ana winds pick up here, we are at dire risk in this area. A couple years back, I guess more than a few years back, Irvine was actually affected by one of those wildfires, as you all know, and we were able to hold it off thanks to the courageous work of our firefighters here. But we know that risk is omnipresent and it is increasing because of climate change, and that those LA fires could just as well have been us. And so when I talk to my colleagues in Washington, I point out, hey, we weren't impacted by the fires, but we're subjected to this exact same fire risks every year. Because the growing dryness of our foliage, coupled with the increasing velocity of the Santa Ana winds, means that we are drier, we're more susceptible, that basically this is like tinder, and we have to manage against tinder every year, and we've heard the message loud and clear. It's why in the state Senate, my top priority every year as far as funding, as far as trying to pass legislation was around wildfire risk, and we were able to get a lot of money, because back then the budget in California was good. Not the case anymore, unfortunately, but very aware of those risks, and unfortunately, right now, as was alluded to, we are facing a very unprecedented and uncertain time around the role of the federal government in a whole host of different areas. And you guys are seeing this in a lot of the different ways in which you interact as members of society. As professors, grad students, and students, members of the university community, you're seeing the attacks on higher education, the attempts to defund research through the NSF, the NIH, the attempts to go after the political agendas of higher education, of the independence and academic independence of higher ed. You're seeing it with the attempts to roll back, quote unquote, the Green New Deal and try to defund projects that are associated with environmental progress. So, and then of course you're seeing it with the defunding of FEMA. You're seeing it NSF, NIH, just the slashing of NOAA, potentially looking to maybe eliminate NOAA. There was, I think, some proposals floated to eliminate FEMA. So these are all things that I don't think were on anyone's bingo card when Donald Trump took office. And so I like to tell people I've been in office for now 3.5 months, and it feels like it's been many, many years. I was a lot less gray when I started this, but and my running joke right now is we're all living through Dorian Gray, except that we are the portrait. but it's been a wild ride in Washington, and I guess I'd just start with this. Almost all of what the Trump administration is doing is illegal. And I think that's the first thing to just emphasize is there is a process set up, and you guys all learn it because you actually went to good schools, you paid attention during classes. That's why you're affiliated with UCI. But you learn as an elementary school kid that the Constitution gives Congress, and only Congress, the right to make laws and to appropriate money. And at the end of the day, that's all this is about. Like 90% of what's happening right now in the defunding of different agencies, of different programming, it's all about that, which is that Congress appropriated money for certain uses. Congress created certain agencies, certain programs, and right now, whether it's Doge or Elon Musk or Donald Trump through executive orders, they are claiming the right to reroute funding that Congress appropriated, to eliminate agencies that Congress created, and that is why we're in a constitutional crisis every day. So when you hear us talk about the constitutional crises, there's actually a lot of constitutional crises happening right now, but a central one is around our Article 1 authorities in the Constitution to pass laws and to appropriate money. And the good news is that we're winning in the courts. I think I was just at a briefing yesterday with Steve Vladeck, the leading law professor at Georgetown, and Jamie Raskin, who is our ranking member on judiciary. Apparently, there have been something like 300, 400 lawsuits filed. So far, we've won 140. Almost all of the motions and TROs and different orders issued by judges have gone in favor of the plaintiffs against the Trump administration. So we're at like something like 143 wins so far, and that number is going to keep mounting. And the Supreme Court, and we know it's a conservative Supreme Court, but it's also a Supreme Court that I think is getting tired of the blatant attacks on the rule of law, on Congress's authority, and on the independence of the courts right now. And so we are seeing more and more aggressive posture, even from very conservative justices like Neil Gorsuch, who are standing up for the rule of law right now and saying, no, you can't do this. Now, will that trickle down to helping out FEMA, to addressing wildfire risk, to restoring funding for universities, for higher education, for research, for science? I don't know. I suspect the answer is yes. I just don't know if that's going to be quickly enough to restore normalcy. And I know in visiting UCI a lot that you guys here are doing amazing work. That the STEM stuff here, the environmental stuff here is truly amazing. We're developing huge innovations. And this is leading to massive economic growth in the region. And so when you think about California and Southern California in particular, we have become a central hub for economic growth in life sciences, in clean tech. There's a reason for that. It's because we have excellent universities with high caliber research scientists in places like UCI, UCSD that are developing innovations that become very important companies. They create thousands of jobs. They're part of the central lifeblood of California's economy. And of course, that's a part of US growth as well. So we want to keep that going. Unfortunately, what we're seeing right now, whether it's the attacks on higher ed, the attacks on science, or the attacks on a lot of immigrants, is that I think people are choosing right now to not come to places like UC Irvine or UC San Francisco or Stanford. And that is going to hurt us in 10 years, in 5 years, in 20 years. And it's probably honestly going to hurt our ability to address wildfire risk, which I know is what we're here to talk about. And so my unfortunate reality here is that I think for the next 4 years, as I was saying to a couple of you earlier, we're going to be dealing with an administration that is going to pretend like climate change doesn't exist. I just sat through a long natural resources markup earlier this week. It has been described, and it very clearly is, the most aggressive anti-environment bill in history. It is going after all of our public lands, allowing drilling, mining excavation, basically by right. And in a shameful, and this is our national parks, it's our open spaces, it's areas that even 50 years ago they didn't allow, just unlimited drilling and excavation. And what was truly a shameless display, one of my colleagues across the aisle at around 11:30 introduced a 33-page amendment that would give away public lands in his neighboring Democratic districts. And we had 5 minutes to review this, and he refused to answer any questions about what the bill did, why everybody who was associated with those districts, including the counties and the cities, opposed this amendment. He wouldn't answer any questions about what the bill, the purpose of this bill was, and they just rammed it through on a partisan vote. And so again, we're seeing just a wholesale giveaway, and it looks like, some of you may remember last year that Donald Trump promised the oil industry that if they gave him $1 billion in campaign contributions, he would give them everything they wanted. And this looks like kind of the fulfillment of that, unfortunately. So we're going backwards, not forwards. We're going to do everything we can on my side to try to slow this down, to stop it, hoping that folks in the Senate might stop this, because this is going to hurt our ability to fight wildfires. It's going to accelerate climate change, and that is the last thing we need. But thank you all for being here. Happy to take any questions you might have, and know that we're going to continue fighting for smart policy, for science, for higher education, fighting for the rule of law.
So we don't want to keep our congressperson too long, but we maybe have time for one question we want to get into the rest of the day. If there is a question up there, and if one question here, yes.
Sure. Thank you, Congressmember, for that informative briefing. What is the current status of the California environmental waivers? I know that's been going through the process and it's in Senate now.
So the CRA unfortunately passed, the Congressional Review Act. I believe that you've already had one circuit court, and I don't have the chance to follow every piece of litigation out there, but I believe you have one circuit court, or at least district court, that has already ruled that the waivers can't be just undone through. The Congressional Review Act is a complicated thing, but basically what it says is that Congress can overturn an executive action made within a certain time frame in the closing days of the last administration. But the waivers have existed for a long time, and so the extension of the waivers by Biden, this court, and I think most legal experts I've talked to, is not something that would be subject to the Congressional Review Act. So it will go to the Senate next. The Senate may or may not pass it, but I believe, and by the way, the reason this is important is because the CRA's filibuster immune, so they only need 51 votes. They don't need 60. But I believe that if it does pass and Trump signs it, the courts may end up determining that this is not a valid use of congressional authority. So we'll see what happens. That's a very important issue. And for those of you who don't know, California is able to set our own standards because we've had long-standing waivers that allow us to adopt certain types of emissions and other environmental standards. And so that's the reason that we can pass laws regulating emissions of cars, pushing for more electric vehicles, things like that, that have been really important in setting the market for the world. So when I was a state senator, when we went abroad, even when Newsom declared a non-binding mandate that we'd move to all zero emissions vehicles by the year 2030, even though that was not binding by force of law, it was just an executive declaration, Europe decided that they would follow it and turn it into a binding mandate, and we see the markets consistently follow what California does.
Thank you.
But thank you very much, appreciate it, and
I think that this is sort of a remarkable opportunity to hear from a lot of interesting people. We hear, in the media, and as our representative was saying, lots of turbulence in D.C., lots of concern. You might get the impression that the country is deeply divided in every way imaginable, but we also know there's a strong center, and most Americans focus on issues and agree that we need to address some of the economic concerns people have about the high cost of living, the high cost of education, the high cost of healthcare, and almost everybody in the country wants to live in a safe, clean, healthy environment. And we know that the wildfires were a wake-up call. Were our elected officials, were our bureaucrats, was the insurance sector, were residents taking seriously the information that scientists have been sharing for a long time about our vulnerability in Southern California and so on. And now we have just this enormous sort of cascade of concerns about rebuilding, the cost of rebuilding, what's happening with insurance, what's happening to health, what's happening to what's contaminated, what's livable, what's not, and what's the risk outside of that area, what's the risk down here, where what goes on in Riverside and San Bernardino affect our air quality. And we have big areas, precious areas like Crystal Cove, which are very flammable and could disappear under the right conditions. Do we have the early warning systems? Do citizens understand what we're up against? Do the 34 governments here at the local level, are they taking the right actions? So to bring together this group of people to talk about that is wonderful, and I thank you all for attending. We're going to have 3 panels, a little bit of opportunity to hear from experts in the community and at the university, opportunities for you to ask questions. We're going to have a lunch afterwards, and then we're going to close by sort of getting your feedback, getting your views, and we will prepare a sort of post-event report distilling what did we learn, what needs to be done, how can the university support efforts. Because the School of Social Ecology, which is hosting this, is all about these issues, these transportation, health, environmental issues that everybody here in Orange County is concerned about. Our focus is on bringing science to those issues to help improve understanding, to sort of support debate, to convene important meetings, to affect outcomes, and so on. This is an important one. I'm going to start by inviting the first panel, moderated by Nícola Ulibarrí, up, and she will introduce them, and we'll get back on track here. Nícola.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Nícola Ulibarrí, and I'm faculty member here in Social Ecology in the School of Department of Urban Planning and Public Policy. And thank you all for being here. Our first panel will be focusing really on the physical systems. What happened in LA, why did it happen, and what were the impacts? So if I could invite, our first speaker will be James Randerson, who is a Chancellor's Professor in Earth System Science here at UC Irvine.
So today I'm going to talk to you about the science basis for reducing risk related to Santa Ana wildfires, and my research program is supported by Department of Energy, NASA, and the National Science Foundation. And my lab really focuses on fire dynamics and the basic science that's controlling both trends and feedbacks with the climate system. I use Earth system models, use a lot of satellite data, looking across the globe at how fires are evolving. And this just shows the period of time for which we have high resolution, high quality data from NASA. And you can see the last 2 years were record breaking in terms of the emissions. And this was really a result of huge wildfires across Canada in the last 2 years, and then also in South America, across Bolivia and southern Brazil. So I'd like to turn now directly to the problem at hand, which is Southern California. We have 2 fire regimes that exist simultaneously, but rarely overlap in time and space. So we have summer fires, like this last summer we had the airport fire here in Orange County, also the line fire. These fires tend to burn uphill. They generate giant pyrocumulus clouds, and they last for weeks. They account for most of the burned area in Southern California, over 50%. Then we have another regime, which is the Santa Ana wind-driven fires. And these, of course, are happening primarily during fall and winter. And what's shown on the right, so they're actually in different spots. So if you look at the time that each fire starts, if you look at the bottom panel, a lot of the summer fires that are associated with onshore flow, they occur higher in the mountains often. They often burn uphill, like the line fire burning up into San Bernardino, into the area near Big Bear. And then the Santa Ana fires are often ignited, sometimes different sources, but they tend to be ignited at lower elevations, and they burn downhill because of the extreme offshore winds. And these panels on the right are really complicated, but I really like them. They were created like a decade ago by a project scientist, Yufeng Jim's now a professor at UC Davis. But the top one shows the what's called the Fosberg Fire Weather Index, and it's kind of like overlaid. It's like a cloud over Southern California. So you see the Santa Ana fires, but these are like, this is like the wind times the dryness of the air metric. And you can see like San Diego, Los Angeles, and to some degree Santa Barbara, the place where these communities developed are actually at a kind of have lower wind risk. And then you look at us, and then also like Santa Monica, really high risk. This is climatologically building this out. And then during summer, generally, it's not really the wind as much as that we get these heat waves, and the heat is so extreme that you drive an increase in what fire scientists call vapor pressure deficit, and the vapor pressure deficit can get extreme during a heat wave and allow for a higher probability of an ignition point growing and escaping initial control. So we've been working with a team at UC Irvine and UCLA to try to understand what Santa Ana events pose the greatest risk. We've looked at this, we put together a database, I'll show you in a moment, of all of the Santa Ana events that have happened in the last 70 years. And that's like almost, I think, it's like 1,500 Santa Ana events. And of those Santa Ana events, only like 300 of them have a wildfire associated with them. Some of them have more than one. And so the question is like, what makes a Santa Ana event really bad, like the one that we had in December in January that caused the Palisades and the Eaton fire. So there's 2 pieces of this risk that not everybody's aware of, and it's a little bit different than just directly the wind speed. The first is this, so the first is just like the duration, humidity, and strength of a Santa Ana wind event. And humidity is really critical, but also Santa Ana events, they're not all the same in terms of their humidity. Some of them are really dry, and we found in a couple of papers that actually fundamentally increases the risk as much as the wind speed itself. The other piece that we're not doing a good job communicating to the public and the policymakers, it's appreciated in the fire community and I believe in the wildfire science community, is that fuel moisture that's called the live fuel moisture of shrubs, just prior to the Santa Ana event, is a critical predictor of the risk. So what we've done, we're doing this machine learning project. So we've got this database, like 1,500 events, 300 have fires. We're trying to classify what is it that's unique about these fires. So the first thing we have to do is identify when Santa Ana events occur. The panel on the left is showing the top panel is I believe that's maybe it's cut off a little bit. I think that's the humidity in blue. It's cut off. The middle one's the wind speed, and then the pressure gradient shown on the bottom. And so generally during a Santa Ana event, there's really high pressure over Nevada. And it's higher pressure there than at Los Angeles Airport. So we're using that as a criteria. So you have to have greater than 350 pascals pressure gradient between Nevada, that Tonopah Airport's in Nevada, and the humidity needs to be less than 40%. And then those areas you can see in like light gray, those are Santa Ana events. So those are like the 1,400, 1,500 events. This is their this is what they look like. We have no Santa Ana events in summer, but they actually last longer, and there are more of them starting in October, November, and December. Okay, so for machine learning, like this diagram, I don't expect you to, so what we're doing right now is like we're crawling through the data, and there are all these different aspects of each Santa Ana event, like how long is it? What's the temperature of the Santa Ana event? What's the vapor pressure deficit of it? And then we also have these metrics that try to account for the moisture of the fuels just prior to the Santa Ana event. So that's like the accumulated precipitation since August 1st, since our rains usually there's no rains in the summer, and then they start building in the fall. And so this is called the covariance matrix, and like it's awesome. Like I could spend like hours. I have spent hours like looking at this, but we're basically mining these relations. So basically, where it's hot means there's a relationship between the two variables, and then where it's blue, it means that there's like a negative link. But then this is kind of cool on the lower right. This shows the breakdown of burned area by those associated with onshore fires in blue, and then the red is the Santa Ana fires. So the Santa Ana fires for us, in terms of climatology, they peak in actually in October. They start dropping off, but once in a while we'll have them that go all the way into January. So the piece that's emerged from this, I just want to leave you with one final piece of information that I think is really important, is that we need for Santa Ana events, we need to have like, everybody knows like, oh, there's like a Category 5 hurricane coming. We don't really have that same kind of a classification system for either heat waves or for Santa Ana events. We need to build it, we need to build a classification system that says, this is a Category 5 Santa Ana event from the perspective of fire risk. It's not just the wind speed, it's that duration, and then also the humidity. So if you have a long duration event, low humidity, and extreme winds, then that's the one that's going to be deadly. We need that, but the piece that I think was missing from the LA fires, unfortunately, there are a few utilities that appreciate this, and it's known in the science community, is that the risk is critically dependent on whether you have a certain amount of rainfall that is allowed to hydrate the shrubs. So our shrubs, I know there are a lot of ecologists in the room like Steve, they grow during the winter. If you have enough rain, they will, what happens is that the shrubs kind of rehydrate first, and then they start growing out like new vegetation. And when that happens, the Santa Ana fire risk goes to 0. And this just illustrates that from that data set that we put together for all the Santa Ana fires. This is the amount of burned area, and this axis is the amount of rain that happened prior to that Santa Ana event. So 80% of all the burned area in SoCal is happening before we get 2 inches of winter rain. So if you have more than 2 inches, your risk, I think there's one little blip up there for one fire that happened after that, but basically it goes down. And this is the piece, normally in January, Mayor Bass should have been able to travel wherever she wanted to go, because there would have been a problem for that Santa Ana event with the forecast from the Weather Service, that with that forecast, it wouldn't have led to a risk for fires if we had had a normal rain year. But what happens, we had very little rain, no rain basically, all the way into mid-January. And so until you have that 2 inches of basically hydrating and replenishing moisture, everybody has to be on alert. And that's the piece I would argue that the science community and maybe the weather community has not been as effective in communicating to policymakers. So these are the steps for moving forward. So I'll hand it over to our next panel member. Thank you, Nícola.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. And we'll have all 3 speakers present, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards. So please write them down if you have them. So our next speaker is Madison Killebrew, who is the program manager for fire prevention and management at the Irvine Ranch Conservancy. So welcome.
No, it's like there's a
Here. I'll let the experts go.
Perfect. Can everyone hear me? Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Madison Killebrew, Program Manager for the Fire Prevention and Management Program at Irvine Ranch Conservancy. IRC is a nonprofit conservation organization managing over 30,000 acres of open space on behalf of public landowners. There are many different aspects to the fire prevention program, but I'm going to be focusing in on OC Firewatch and how we engage our community members with wildfire prevention efforts in the county. This program is directly facilitated by IRC, but it's managed in partnership with the City of Irvine, OC Parks, Orange County Fire Authority, and City of Newport Beach. So what is OC Firewatch? It is a volunteer-based program with over 300 specially trained volunteers that are deployed during high fire risk days in high visibility areas. Like the theme continuing throughout the day, here in coastal Southern California, our most catastrophic and destructive wildfires occur during our high wind events, during those Santa Ana wind events. So our main goal for this program is to reduce ignitions to prevent those catastrophic wildfires before they start and spread. We do this with our volunteers being deployed in those highly visible areas. Over 90% of our ignitions actually start along roadways. So throughout the county, we've identified locations that are of high risk, usually along roadways. We have some locations along trailheads that are highly visible to the public. Our volunteers act as visual deterrents. They have on neon vests, they have big magnets that they put on their car that say Firewatch. So it's that first step of deterring any kind of suspicious or dangerous behaviors. If they are to see any kind of dangerous behaviors, they are trained to report this either to our operations center or, if needed for the situation, to escalate that to 911. Our volunteers are also trained to engage with the community to help spread awareness on fire prevention, awareness, and what really is our risk here in Orange County versus in more forested areas. A lot of time when people think of wildfire, they think of forest fires. So how do we differentiate that during these red flag warning events? And lastly, our volunteers assist with early detection and reporting of ignitions. These wind-driven fires, as we saw in January, can grow rapidly and unexpectedly. Embers from a fire can actually travel miles ahead of the body of the fire and ignite new ones, spot fires, wherever they land. So it can be very unpredictable, very hard to contain. So the earlier we are detecting and reporting these fires, the better chance our fire practitioners have in containing and suppressing, protecting our wildlands and our communities. So what triggers our volunteers to deploy? First and foremost, a red flag warning. I'm sure most people here have heard of red flag warnings. Maybe you're not too familiar with what that actually means. Our National Weather Service will issue a red flag warning when we have high winds, low relative humidity. So when our vegetation moistures are low, when the vegetation is easily ignitable, and then if temperatures are high as well, that is also a factor. We also deploy annually on 4th of July. As you can imagine, we are at an increased risk during that time due to fireworks, and also people are celebrating throughout the day, and sometimes they're doing things or going in places where maybe they shouldn't be, so we do an all-day deployment with our volunteers to ensure that people are staying out of certain areas. And lastly, some special events. If any of our Firewatch partners has a project or any kind of program they need assistance with, like closing trails or section of the lands, they can request that our Firewatch volunteers help support that. We have 35 different physical Firewatch locations near wilderness open spaces or high visibility areas throughout the county. As you can see, many of them along roadsides, but we also have non-field support roles. So if you are unable to go outside, or you can't leave your house, or for whatever reason you can't be in the field that day, again, this is a volunteer-based program, so our coverage during a deployment is highly based on volunteer availability. We run an operations center at IRC headquarters where volunteers will man phone lines. We do hourly check-ins with our volunteers out in the field to make sure everyone is remaining safe. We'll also take down data points with each volunteer, taking in the weather conditions, the temperature, relative humidity, the winds, so we can track our risk for different locations throughout the day. And if you are unable to make it into the office or into the field, we utilize the UCSD Alert California cameras. If you're not familiar with them, highly recommend checking out their website. They're free to the public. But if we have any locations throughout the county that we didn't get as much coverage as we wanted, we'll assign volunteers working the virtual fire tower a camera that overlooks that area so we have more perspective on a landscape scale. And lastly, as you can imagine, especially in our more remote locations, cell phone service may not be the best. So we have a number of Firewatch volunteers that have their ham radio license. So we run a net control center. So we'll communicate during those hourly check-ins via radio with those volunteers that do not have cell service, just to make sure everyone's remaining safe and they feel supported. Here's just a quick snapshot of the inception of Firewatch. It started back in 2006. That orange perimeter up on the top was the Sierra fire that was a little too close to home for us. Our offices are right in here, so it definitely woke us up to how close that risk is to us. And at that time, we didn't have a fire prevention program, so this really, for lack of better words, sparked our interest in getting into the fire prevention space. So after that fire in 2006, we started building Firewatch, seeing how we can get community members involved. Even though we didn't have a fire prevention program, we had a volunteer program. So we started training volunteers, building out that. And then in 2007, unfortunately, pretty shortly after we started Firewatch, we had the Santiago fire. And that was actually our first deployment. And it was quickly determined that this fire was caused by arson. And because all of the fire practitioners and all the resources were going to those areas, we deployed our Firewatch volunteers in different areas of the county to help protect those vulnerable spaces while all resources were going to North County. If you would like to learn more about Firewatch, you can do so with this QR code.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker is Brett Sanders, who is a Chancellor's Professor in Civil and Environmental Engineering here at UCI. So,
thank you, Nícola. Doing the arrow, down arrows? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this program. It's really great to see the campus community come together, and including our off-campus partners. So I've been working in the post-wildfire space, along with Doug Houston, thinking about how flood and debris flows and things like that develop and impact populations. But more broadly, I've been thinking about different types of climate risks and how information about those risks is penetrating property owners, residents, businesses, who then have to make decisions about, where do I move, where do I buy property, how do I manage my operations. And our work attracted the interest of Eric Roston, who's a reporter for Bloomberg, when we presented at AGU about some of the differences we were seeing between our assessments of flood risk across Southern California with some of our more detailed models and some of the more large-scale models that have been developed for sort of nationwide applications. And he ended up writing the story in Bloomberg, which sort of drawing attention to the fact that this new cottage industry is developed with a lot of different companies marketing information about risks, and this information is penetrating investment decisions, it's penetrating mitigation decisions, it's penetrating the insurance market. And so I want to shed some light on how we got here how do we get to this place where we're trying to fight these growing, intense climate pressures with highly uncertain data? And I'll draw from the flood space, but I think there's some parallels to other types of hazards. This map here shows shaded areas representative of FEMA flood hazard classification, for different types of hazard classifications. So for decades now, across the US, risk management in the flood space has been primarily guided by a classification of the land. Either you're inside a hazard zone or you're outside of a hazard zone. And when you're inside of a hazard zone, there's certain building codes, there's certain insurance requirements that are in place to try to reduce vulnerability, to try to reduce exposure, and therefore reduce risks. But there's no quantitative information about risk. I mean, inside of a 100-year flood hazard zone, like this purple area, there are places that flood every year, but it's classified as a 1% annual chance. So this tool, this mapping of risk that we've relied upon for decades in the flood space is really sort of not a tool that's well designed for helping property owners, for helping residents appreciate what is my level of risk, and therefore what can I do about it. So in businesses, another interesting and pretty powerful statistic is that the US leads the world by far as being home to most expensive climate disasters anywhere on the planet. If you looked at the top 10 most expensive disasters ever recorded, at least 6 or 7 of them are all in the US. And they're being driven by tropical storms, hurricanes that are causing massive flooding over many different states, wind damage, flood damage, all these damages. It's the primary number one. And now we're going to see whether the Los Angeles fires may penetrate the top 10 most expensive losses, and it would add some diversity to the types of events that are capable of generating these events that are costing well over $100 billion. So those are some of the big ones. Okay, so basically, the U.S. is home. We're doing something wrong. I guess that's my point. We've got to do better because we are leading the world and sort of home to the most expensive, costliest disasters. And here's sort of just a sort of set of images from different websites, from different companies that have stepped into this space because businesses want better data. I mean, they're not getting it from governments. So they're turning to the private sector and they're saying, can you provide us with better information so that we can decide, what is the exposure of our transportation network? What's the exposure of 450 different Walmarts across the US? What's the exposure of Costco? What's the exposure of our data centers? These are questions that big financial interests would like to know, and these companies have stepped in to meet that need. And they're serving the insurance industry, they're serving financial services industry, they're also serving the civil engineering services industry. So if a civil engineer wants to sort of help a community at risk to design and mitigate for a hazard, then they can use this data to say this is what's at risk, and they can convince FEMA to give them money to build, if FEMA still exists, to build a levee or dam or some sort of structure that provides some protection. So this data is very influential. My next point is that our paper, which was published in Earth's Future last year, pointed out, and this is so light you can't even see it, so forgive me, but this is one of the graphics showing that between a data product provided by the First Street Foundation and a data product that we developed here in our lab trying to characterize the flood risk across Los Angeles, and this is work that Richard and Nícola both collaborated with me on, we compared these data products side by side, and we only found a 20% agreement in which properties were most at risk. Well, why is that? These large-scale models are relying on pretty coarse digital elevation models to represent flood spreading. And in the flood space, it's one of the hardest risks to get right. Flooding can be divided by a high street wall or a flood wall or a levee. Very narrow features can totally reshape the distribution of a flood hazard. And most of that information is left out of these large-scale models. They also leave out urban storm drain systems, flood protection systems. Many of those are dramatically oversimplified in these large-scale, national-scale models. So it's not surprising you get sort of, at the property scale, you're getting big differences. But then the same data is being fed back into insurance programs, and even the National Insurance Program has turned to some of these data products to sort of shape some of the risk, or I guess premium levels that they're charging. We also found there was very strong bias in who is exposed. So our model was pointing to high levels of exposure in the lowland areas along main stem rivers. Communities like Compton, Long Beach, Carson, those types of communities predicted much higher exposure, whereas some of these other data products were predicting exposure in more upland areas that tended to be more affluent. So you saw both like a sort of a disparity in the who is exposed and also the social groups who were exposed. So those are some of the implications of this uncertain data that we have today trying to manage these risks. So this slide here was set up as a PowerPoint with lots of little animations, and I've now got it on one PDF, but I think I can walk you through. So the idea here is it's meant to illustrate how we intended to manage risk and kind of where things have gone wrong and where things might be changing going forward. Okay, so we're going to start off with the big players here. We've got the federal government, we've got state and local governments. Over here we have property owners and businesses. Okay. Down here we've got the insurance industry, and over here we have the reinsurance industry, which is there to insure the insurance companies. Okay. So decades ago, we had a problem in the US, losses are escalating, federal government was bailing out communities after every event. They're saying, look, we don't want to keep bailing out all these communities who are being impacted by disasters. We need you to take more responsibility for your own risk. Okay. So there was some debate about how to do that, but they wanted to have an insurance program. But then there's also an affordability issue. If you started charging insurance at sort of actuarial rates, then that would be unaffordable for many people living in these high-risk areas. So they came up with this plan. We will develop the National Flood Insurance Program. This flood insurance program will provide discounted flood insurance to people in high-hazard areas on the condition that state and local governments regulated exposure and vulnerability. So there's supposed to be a deal between the federal governments and the local governments. We'll put this system in place if you local and state governments can take steps to make sure that that exposure, that vulnerability is reduced. What happened? Well, the next thing that happened is that it's what's sometimes called as the local sort of safe development paradox, which is that because we now have areas that are sort of protected from flooding, there's an incentive to put more infrastructure, more assets in those areas that are safe. And also cities and local governments are incentivized to put more properties in their areas so they can collect more revenue, have more sort of local revenue generated. So that ended up basically leading to higher and higher levels of exposure inside these high hazard areas. So then state and local governments, they turn to federal government and say, we need your help building bigger defenses. So then this first arrow here is like a feedback mechanism, which is we need to build levees stronger, we need to build dams taller in order to sort of manage that exposure and those losses. And then over here, bigger dams, bigger levees, more development, more exposure, so that pulls in there. So this was on for some time. Disasters hit. You know, there's down here. There's also businesses saying, you know what, we have needs that aren't being met by the National Insurance Program. So insurance industries are stepping in and having insurance at actuarial rates. But when we finally get to big catastrophes, the losses are so great, the insurance companies, the reinsurance companies say, we can't cover your losses anymore. We're going to step back. We're not going to be involved in this anymore. So the policies actually exclude catastrophes from your insurance. So you can have flood insurance, but be excluded from an event that's a catastrophe. It's kind of wild. So that's how the policies often get written. And now you got the federal government having to pay billions and billions and billions of dollars to state and local governments, you know, for these massive losses now. And they're saying, we don't want to be involved in this anymore. So we're in a moment today, a really critical moment today, where the federal government is now saying, we want to cut our responsibility for this emergency management. We want state and local governments to take charge. We're going to step back. And so if this goes away, that means the idea of affordable insurance goes away. That means that we have a worsening housing crisis. And so my point is that we really, I think, would benefit from more accurate data on what's at risk. Communicate to everyone what's at risk, help people understand, are you better off with insurance? Are you better off with investing in your property and making it, fortifying yourself against these losses? Are you better off moving away? Allowing insurance companies to see where they can find markets that are more feasible for businesses. So it's really an interesting time. And what UC Irvine is doing, and working with Cal OES, we're working with California Department of Water Resources, we're working with the governor's office, we're working with Edison, PG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric. We built this consortium to build out this data statewide to serve California's needs. So we're really excited to see that moving forward. Thank you, Nícola. Thank you, everyone.
Great. If I could have all three of our speakers please come up to the front before you disappear. Okay. And we have about 10 minutes now for questions. So, are there any burning questions from the audience? Otherwise, I might take a chair's part. Okay, yes.
Okay.
We'll start.
Would you like a microphone?
Sure.
Thank you. Hi, Hey, I'm Amy with Orange County United Way, the 211 Connection Center program. Just wanted to say thank you all for your presentations. They were very informative. My question might be leaning toward Brett. Why or are we having conversations with the insurance companies to incentivize home mitigation? So I was on a panel with OC Fire Chief Tennessee, and he was saying there's pretty simple home modifications that homeowners can make, like putting in a fire mitigating attic vent that can help prevent some home fires. So are those conversations happening? And if not, how can we bring the folks to the table to
Yeah, my understanding interacting with insurance companies is that, is this working? Check. Hey.
Yeah.
So my understanding talking to insurance companies is that many of them will not issue a policy until you have taken steps to basically go after the biggest vulnerabilities that you may have. But I imagine that varies insurance company to insurance company. There may be differences. I think also there's somewhat of a coordination that takes place between local governments and insurance companies in terms of outreach and trying to get information to people. So I'm not sure exactly where all that falls. Maybe other panelists have more information about that, but absolutely, we are in an era where more and more responsibility needs to fall upon the property owner to sort of look at what's vulnerable. If there's some simple things that could be done to reduce exposure and vulnerability, that can go a long way. And certainly that's the trade-off you're looking at. Is it more cost effective to just, say, handle the risk through insurance, or is it more cost effective to modify the property in some way to make it less vulnerable? In my work in Miami, there's a lot of grade raising going on. So we're seeing a lot of property owners take advantage of FEMA incentives to raise their properties to higher elevations, which is like an example of that. So there's sometimes like incentive programs can be pretty effective too, to try to like stimulate reduce vulnerability. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I'm not sure. I think if you're close to it.
So yeah, my question is kind of related and mostly to Brett, which is in working in the space of flooding, when we game this out down the road, whether it's sea level rise, fire, or flooding, one of the things when it gets really high risk, right, and you have insurance drop, it seems to be sort of an eminent domain type space where we say, okay, at some point this is going to be grandfathered or phased out. You can keep living here, but then we're going to kind of stop doing that. And I'm curious if you thought of that, or the people you're talking to have, and if you see that as a feasible tool moving forward, or if you think we're just not going to go there because it's not politically palatable.
Thanks for really good question, and I may ask Nícola to comment as well because it kind of falls in her wheelhouse. But property acquisition is one of the tools in the toolbox of adaptation, trying to get assets and exposure out of harm's way. There's different ways that can be done, from eminent domain versus buyout programs. And I think that there's challenges with all those. It's really a really tough thing to do. The area where you probably have the most activity is in areas that are doing so-called managed retreat, sea level adaptation. We're starting to see this develop faster. States like North Carolina also have they have buyout programs. So allows us, unfortunately, and sometimes you'll see buyout programs where it'll get someone out of the property, and then something else will be built there. So there can be sort of one step forward, two steps back. Maybe I'll let Nícola comment as well. But that is certainly part of the toolbox.
I will say, I think there are other places doing this. California, it is very politically unpalatable. And just as an anecdote, I was applying for a grant last month that would have looked at managed retreat and for sea level rise and coastal adaptation. And none of the cities that are actually doing these programs would give us a letter of support for the grant, because it was too politically like they didn't want to be seen as anything associated at all publicly with this. So we couldn't apply for the grant because we couldn't get a letter of support. And it's also a lot more common in the flood space than in the fire space. All right. Other questions?
Yes. Okay. And I think, is this one working now? Yeah. Okay. So we'll take this one. Okay. For your question, if you just put it close. Okay.
Is this work?
No. A little closer.
Yeah, closer than that. It's okay. I have a loud voice. I'll just speak loudly. So I was wondering if the panelists could comment on some of the more unique elements of the LA fires that, it sort of started in the wildlife-urban interface, but kind of moved to a more urban fire. And so it seems like there's kind of two different risks, like risk categories, like the fire starting and then the fire spreading. So like some anecdotal initial data that's coming out of what some of my colleagues are doing is showing that the spread of the fire was potentially more so between households, between structures, than between vegetation and households once the fire entered some of these neighborhoods. Similarly, I was hearing about these fire watches that often they are not located in densely populated areas per se, which is another place that fires could start. So I'm just wondering, what sort of unique features of this sort of wildlife-urban interface, but also urban fire, how would you apply the work that you're doing to that particular fire?
Those are, I think, really great questions. And I would say a couple of things. I think that trying to understand, there's a huge amount of science work going on to how fires burn through natural vegetation types. And I think it is really taking off now, that interface of how, simulating the spread through neighborhoods. And so that, I think, is a little bit behind. We don't have as good models that project what kind of neighborhoods, what ages, what types of materials lead to fire spread rates. So I would comment that for these fires, there's embers that are just moving kilometers, and then looking for the attic, or what we were talking about a little earlier. So there's a house-to-house piece, but there's just spotting that's going on so far that I'm not sure if I could say it's going as fast, but we have a lot of areas in Orange County that are actually incredibly vulnerable to that kind of same situation. So an example, very similar fire is the Laguna fire that burned through a lot of the open space near the Nix Nature Center down towards Laguna. And one thing that's striking relative to your question and also the earlier questions about the grandfathered risk and expanding risk, is that Laguna Canyon has developed tremendously in the last decade. And there's like one road that goes like, the 133 that goes like down that canyon. And so, yeah, I would just say from my perspective, a lot of the hazard mapping, for a lot of the state, one hazard map for fire risk works well. For us, we need a separate hazard map for the wind-driven fire, which is totally different direction than the summer fire. And that risk is critical for not just the structures, but for saving lives. And I don't think we're doing a good enough job on the science to, when you're simulating that hazard map, you have to use totally different boundary conditions for the different fire types, because the winds are totally different, the directionality, and so anyway.
I'll add a little piece on the education side, especially with ember awareness. IRC is the facilitator of an informal fire prevention working group here in Orange County called CUSP. It was convened by OCFA back in 2015. It has every type of organization or fire practitioner, utilities, land managers, fire departments that have any kind of fire prevention responsibility here in Orange County. We conducted a survey a couple years ago now, a community just like education survey to see, gauge what people really know about wildfire and the type of risk we have here in coastal Southern California. And only 12% of respondees acknowledged that embers were any risk at all during a wildfire event. So like we saw in LA with those ember storms, like embers, I believe it's up to 5 miles they can spread and ignite new fires where they land. And the coastal fire in Aliso, I believe, or Laguna Niguel maybe, a couple years back, there was 20 homes lost and all of those homes burned from the attic down. So it wasn't the vegetation surrounding their homes. It's still important to hardscape and zone 0 and everything around your homes. But those homes, embers entered under the eaves, into the attics, and burned all those homes from the inside out. And those are multi-million-dollar homes. So these people have the means to harden their homes and to screen their vents, but I think it's really that education piece that was lacking. And like you mentioned before, even if you individually make efforts to harden your own home, your neighbor's home might catch your home on fire. So it can't just be on an individual basis, it has to be a community scale effort. So I think a really big piece is education and just awareness of what our risk really is.
All right, well, that is all the time we have. So let's give a big round of applause to our